The relocation form was already printed when I walked into the Human Resources office that morning. That was the part I noticed first, before Pat Lund said a single word. The paper was sitting square in the center of her desk, turned to face the chair I was about to sit in, with a little adhesive flag on the signature line. She had printed it the night before, or first thing that morning, before I had any idea this conversation was going to happen. The decision was older than the meeting. I understood that the way you understand weather coming in, a change in the pressure before the sky does anything at all. "Sit down, Audrey," she said. "Thank you for coming up." As if I had been given a choice about coming up. As if a calendar invitation titled "Quick Sync" with no agenda from the head of Human Resources was the kind of thing a person could decline. I sat. I folded my hands on my lap. 12 years I had worked in that building, and I had never once been called into that particular office to hear good news. Pat Lund was a careful woman in her early 50s who wore cardigans the color of oatmeal and spoke in the soft, regretful voice of someone delivering a diagnosis she personally found very sad. She slid the form an inch closer to me and folded her own hands to mirror mine, which I think she believed made her seem warm. "We're making some adjustments to the floor," she said. "With the acquisition moving forward, the leadership wants the front of the office to feel, well, fresh, energetic. The buyers come through, they see the window line first, and we want that first impression to land a certain way." "All right," I said. "We'd like to move you to one of the interior workstations, the one near the east corridor. It's a wonderful spot, very quiet, and honestly, you spend most of your day heads down in the systems anyway, so the window was a little wasted on you if we're being practical about it." She smiled when she said wasted, to take the edge off it, and the smile was worse than the word. The workstation near the east corridor was the cubicle beside the freight elevator. Everyone in the building called it that. The freight elevator desk, the place where they parked the temp during tax season, and the intern nobody had a real plan for. It rattled when the elevator ran, which was constantly, because that was where the deliveries came up. "That's the cubicle by the freight elevator," I said. I did not say it sharply, I said it the way you confirm an address. "It's near the east corridor," she said again, gently, as if I'd gotten the name wrong rather than the geography exactly right. "And my office?" Here she looked down at her hands. "We're going to have Sabrina take the window office. She's coming on board to support the marketing liaison work through the transition, and it makes sense to have that role visible up front. It's really about optics, Audrey. It's nothing about your performance. You know how strong we all think you are." She paused. "Be a team player on this one. It's just optics. Just optics." She said the word the way other people say it was nobody's fault, the way people say these things happen, a phrase built specifically so that no human being inside it has to have done anything. Sabrina was Doug Renner's wife. Doug Renner was my manager. The marketing liaison role had not existed 3 weeks earlier. I knew that for a fact because I had seen every org chart that mattered in that company for years, and there had never been a marketing liaison, and there was certainly never going to be one who needed the best window office on the floor to do a job that had no defined responsibilities. I looked at the form. It was a standard internal relocation acknowledgement. By signing it, I was confirming that the move was being made at the company's discretion and that I had no objection. There was a line for comments. There was the little flag on the signature line waiting. I want to tell you what went through me in that moment because it was not what people imagine. People imagine fury or tears or the urge to stand up and say all the things you have swallowed for years. I felt none of that. What I felt was a strange cold clarity, like stepping out of a stuffy room into winter air. I felt the whole shape of it at once. 12 years, 40,000 lines of integration logic that the entire acquisition depended on, every single one of which I had written or rewritten. A manager who had been promoted over me on the strength of my own results. And now a cubicle by the freight elevator so that his wife could sit in my light. I picked up the pen. I signed my name. I did not write anything in the comments line. "You're so good about things," Pat Lund said, with what I think was genuine relief. "Truly, this is why everyone says you're the easiest person here." I stood. I thanked her for letting me know, and I walked out. I did not let her see anything move across my face because I had learned a long time ago that the people who move you do not get to watch you absorb it. That is the only thing you keep sometimes. The watching. You can give them the office. You do not have to give them the show. My box was already half packed when I got back because the building's facilities team had been told before I had. There was a flattened cardboard box leaning against my desk and a roll of tape sitting on my chair. Somebody had taped the bottom of it shut the night before. The bottom of the box was the only part anyone had bothered to do. I packed the framed photo of my parents, my 2 coffee mugs, The small jade plant I had kept alive on that windowsill for 9 years, the spare reading glasses, the good stapler I had bought with my own money because the company ones jammed. It does not take long to pack 12 years. That is one of the quiet cruelties of it. You think a life at a place will fill 100 boxes, and it fills less than one. In the corridor, halfway to the freight elevator, I passed Sabrina Renner coming the other way with a box of her own, framed photographs balanced on top, a little succulent in a brass pot. "Oh," she said brightly. "You're all moved already? That was fast. Doug said you'd understand. You're so good about things." It was the second time in 20 minutes someone had told me I was good about things, in that particular tone, the tone you use for a dog that does not bite. "There's still a box of paper clips in the top left drawer," I told her. "They're the kind that don't bend." "Oh, thank you," she said, and she meant it. And she went on toward the window, toward my window, the one with the morning light, and I went on toward the freight elevator, and behind me I heard the elevator ding, and that was the first of the thousands of times I would hear it over the next 6 weeks. I set my box on the cubicle desk. The surface was sticky in one corner, where someone had spilled something and not cleaned it. I wiped it with a tissue. I plugged in my monitor, I logged in, and I opened the integration files that no one else in that building could read, and I kept working. The freight elevator ran about every 4 minutes. All day it dinged, the doors rolled open, the doors rolled shut, a clock that only counted backward. Here is the thing they did not know, the thing that almost no one knew, sitting up there in their oatmeal cardigans deciding whose window mattered. Everything they were about to sell ran through me. Meridian Tool and Supply was a mid-size industrial distributor, the kind of company most people never think about, the kind that sits in a low building off a state highway and quietly moves the parts that make the visible economy work. We did not make anything. We connected things. A factory in one state needed a specific run of fittings from a supplier in another, fast, reliably, with the paperwork clean, and we were the ones in the middle who made that happen 10,000 times a day. The whole value of a company like that is not in any single product. It is in the system. It is in whether the orders, the inventory, the suppliers, the trucks, the billing, and the customers all talk to each other without dropping anything on the floor. When I joined in 2014, at 32, that system was a mess held together with spreadsheets and the heroic memory of 3 people who were about to retire. I was hired as a logistics coordinator, which is a polite way of saying I was the person who got yelled at when something did not arrive. For the first 2 years, I learned where every body was buried. Then I started digging up the bodies and building something better. Over the next 8 years, I built the logistics integration division almost from nothing. By the time I was 42, every order that came into Meridian, every supplier connection, every inventory sync, every billing handoff ran through a system I had designed, written, debugged at 2 in the morning, and quietly rebuilt 3 times as the company grew. 40,000 lines, give or take. I knew them the way you know the rooms of a house in the dark. When the acquisition rumor started, in early January of 2026, I knew immediately why a larger company would want us. It was not our trucks or our warehouses or our customer list, though those mattered. It was the integration. A buyer could bolt Meridian's system onto their own and instantly run a region they could not otherwise reach. The thing that made us worth buying was the thing that ran on my screen. I knew that the way I knew my own name. The people on the executive floor did not know it or did not want to. To them, I was the back office woman, steady, reliable, heads down, not really leadership material. They had decided that about me years ago, and they had never updated the file. My steadiness, which was actually discipline, which was actually the result of 1,000 small decisions not to waste my dignity on people who had already made up their minds, read to them as a lack of ambition. They mistook the quiet for emptiness. People do that. They hear a still room, and they assume nobody is home. The night of the demotion, I drove home and made dinner and did not cry over a cubicle. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect the woman in these stories to break down at the kitchen sink. I did not. I had broken down years earlier over smaller things, and somewhere along the way, I had used up that particular response. What I felt instead was tired, and underneath the tired, something steadier and colder that I did not yet have a name for. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and I kept the integration on schedule, from home that night, for free, because the work was never theirs to take. The acquisition close was 8 weeks out, and the integration test had to be flawless or the deal would wobble, and I was not going to let it wobble. Not because I owed Meridian anything. I had stopped feeling that I owed Meridian anything around the 3rd hour of sitting by the freight elevator. I kept it flawless because it was mine, and you do not let your own work fail just because the people around you have failed you. Let me give you one example, because I think the word system is too clean and bloodless for what the work actually was. In the autumn of 2023, on a Saturday in October, the supplier feed that fed half our inventory data corrupted itself at around 11 at night. I do not need to explain the technical part. What matters is that if it was not fixed before the warehouses open Monday morning, several thousand orders would ship against inventory numbers that were wrong, and the company would spend the next 2 weeks apologizing to its largest customers and refunding money it could not afford to refund. Nobody called me. Nobody had to. I had built an alert into the system years before, a quiet thing that pinged my phone when a feed went sideways, because I had learned that the building would burn down before anyone upstairs noticed the smoke. I drove in. I sat alone in the office at 1 a.m, in the dark, with the vending machine humming in the hallway, and I rebuilt the feed line by line until the sun came up. I was there for 11 hours. On Monday, the warehouses opened, the orders shipped clean, and not one person in that building knew there had been anything to fix, which is exactly how it is supposed to be, because the highest compliment a system can pay you is silence. Doug got an email that month praising the integration team's reliability. He forwarded it to me with a note that said, "Great work, team!" He had been asleep in his bed the entire night I spent saving the thing he was praised for. I did not resent it as much as you might think. I had stopped expecting credit, but I wrote that Saturday down in my record, the way I wrote everything down, the date and the hours, and exactly what would have happened if I had not driven in, and I kept it, and on the morning of the demotion, that page was one of the ones I thought about. The reason I did not break, I think, traces back to 2019, to a conference room and a promotion that was not mine. In 2019, the company created a director-level role over the integration work, the work I had built. I had written the entire business case for that role. I had laid out in a 40-page document exactly why the function needed senior leadership and exactly what that leader would have to understand. Every word of it described me because I was the only person who understood the thing. And then they gave the job to Doug Renner. Doug was a salesman by temperament, a man who was very good in a room and very bad in a spreadsheet, the kind of person who could make a quarterly review feel like a halftime speech. He had managed a sales team and had no idea how the integration worked, but he photographed well and he golfed with the right people, and the old vice president told me they needed someone who could be the face of it. "We need someone who can be the face of it," the vice president said, in a conference room with the blinds half drawn, while Doug sat beside him looking modest. "You're more of a behind-the-scenes person, Audrey. That's a compliment. We need you exactly where you are." "I wrote the case for this role," I said. It was the closest I came in 12 years to fighting for myself out loud. "And it was excellent," the vice president said warmly, as if I had complimented the weather. "That's why we're confident the function is in good hands. Doug's going to lean on you a lot. You two will be a great team." Doug leaned forward then and did the thing that I would watch him do for the next 7 years. He made my work sound like a shared accomplishment that he was generous enough to let me participate in. "I could not do this without Audrey," he said, smiling at me. "She is the engine. I'm just the driver." And everyone in the room nodded, pleased with the metaphor, pleased with themselves, and nobody seemed to notice that the engine does all the work and the driver gets to decide where the car goes and takes it home at night. I built the road. They gave him the car and told me I was lucky to be allowed to maintain it. In the parking lot afterward, my coordinator, Gwen Acosta, found me sitting in my car, not turning the key. Gwen was older than me, near 60 even then, a woman who had seen every version of this happen at 3 different companies and had stopped being surprised by any of it. She got into the passenger seat without asking and sat with me. "One day," she said, "they're going to need you more than you need them. I have watched it my whole life. They always think the steady ones are the disposable ones, right up until the day the steady one is the only thing holding the roof up." She looked at me. "Write down everything, quietly. Every decision you make, every fire you put out, every line you write. Not to use it. Just so that you know in your own bones exactly what you are worth on the days they try to tell you it's less." I did not entirely believe her that day. There's a particular kind of tiredness that comes from being told, over and over, in the warmest possible language, that your job is to make someone else look capable, and that tiredness can make you stop believing that the math will ever come out in your favor. I had a lot of that tiredness in 2019. What Gwen gave me was not hope exactly. It was something more useful than hope. It was a discipline, a thing to do with my hands on the bad days instead of arguing with people who would never hear me. I watched Doug do it again and again over the years. The credit thing, And after a while, I could see the mechanics of it the way a magician sees another magician's trick. The pattern was always the same. I would solve something difficult and unglamorous. Doug would learn just enough about the solution to describe it in a meeting. He would describe it using the word we, which is the most powerful word in the corporate language, because we can mean a team, and it can also mean I, and the listener never knows which. And the speaker is counting on that. We rebuilt the supplier integration. We brought the error rate down. We saved the account. And every time, the we was a man repeating a sentence I had written to people who would credit the man in the room over the woman who was not invited. I learned to stop being in the room, actually, because being in the room and watching it happen was worse than hearing about it afterward. I started the habit anyway, the documenting, because it cost me nothing and because Gwen had never once been wrong about people. For 7 years, I documented, I delivered, and I stopped asking to be seen. I kept a record, a quiet, private record, of everything I built and everything I held together. I never showed it to anyone. It was not a weapon, it was ballast. On the days the company's story about me felt heaviest, I would read my own record and remember the true one. That habit is the only reason I was standing upright when the demotion came. You cannot knock down a person who already knows exactly what she weighs. What none of them knew, sitting up on the executive floor, congratulating themselves on the fresh energy of the window line, was that the ground had already moved under their feet. It had moved in late January, in a beige meeting room at an off-site location 3 weeks before Pat Lund printed her form. The acquiring company was larger than us, a national operation, and they did their due diligence the way serious buyers do. Line by line, function by function, they sent a team. And somewhere in the middle of reading our entire company, down to the studs, they figured out the same thing I had always known. The thing they were buying was a system, and the system was a person. I got an email from a man named Malcolm Frey asking for a confidential conversation, off-site, no Meridian people present. Frey was the integration executive on the buyer's side, the one responsible for making the merged operation actually work after the lawyers were done. I assumed he wanted to grill me on the system, the way buyers do, to make sure it was real and not held together with hope. So I went, and I brought my laptop, ready to defend 40,000 lines. He did not grill me. He had already read everything. He had clearly spent weeks inside our operation, and he understood it better than anyone on Meridian's executive floor ever had, because he was the kind of person who actually read the thing instead of the summary of the thing. "We've gone through the whole company," he said, after about 10 minutes of pleasant, precise questions that told me he already knew the answers. "And I'll be honest with you, Audrey, the whole company is mostly you. The asset we are acquiring, the thing that makes this region worth the price, is the integration architecture, and the integration architecture is you. We are not really buying a distributor. We are buying a system, and we'd be foolish to buy the system without the person who is the system." I did not say anything. I had learned not to fill silences that other people should be filling. "We'd like you to run the region after close," he said. "Regional head of the combined operation, it's the role this entire deal is built around. There are details to work out, and it's contingent on the close going through. And I have to ask you to keep this strictly between us until the ink is dry. Deals are fragile. If this gets out before it's signed, it can blow up in ways that hurt everyone, including you. Can you sit on it?" He said it the way you would hand someone an umbrella. Calm, like it was obvious, like it had always been true, and he was a little surprised I did not already know. "I can sit on it," I said, and I meant it. I went back to Meridian and I told no one, not Gwen, not Aaron Kemper, who was the one other person on my team who understood the system well enough to be dangerous and who I trusted more than anyone in the building. I signed the confidentiality acknowledgement Frey's people sent over, and I kept my mouth shut. And 3 weeks later, Pat Lund printed her relocation form and moved me to the cubicle by the freight elevator. And I signed that one too. I could have ended it in a single sentence. In Pat Lund's office, with the form in front of me, I could have said, "You might want to check with the buyers before you decide whose window matters, because I am going to be running this region in 8 weeks, and I will remember exactly where you sat me." I could have said it and watched her oatmeal cardigan go pale. I did not. And I have thought a great deal about why. Part of it was that I had given my word to Frey, and a deal really can collapse on a careless sentence, and I was not going to risk the whole thing, the region, the jobs, the work, to win one moment in a human resources office. But part of it, the truer part, was something else. I decided that I did not want to be saved from the cubicle. I wanted the room to remember exactly where I had been sitting when they found out. I wanted there to be no question, ever, in anyone's mind about who had been right. If I waved the news around to avoid the freight elevator, then I would have been just another person playing the office game, trading information for position. If I sat there quietly and did the work and let the truth arrive on its own schedule, then when it arrived, it would arrive clean and undeniable, and it would belong entirely to me. So I taped my name card to a cubicle, and I waited. The 6 weeks were not easy. I want to be honest about that too. Pride is a real thing, and it does not stop hurting just because you have decided to be disciplined about it. The squeeze, when it came in the form of being asked to make myself small for other people's comfort. The worst of it was Sabrina. She was not a cruel woman, I came to understand. She was a woman who had been handed a job she could not do, in an office she had not earned, and who genuinely did not see the problem with either, because no one in her life had ever asked her to see it. About 2 weeks after the move, she appeared at my cubicle holding a printout. "I have to present the integration overview to the buyers next week," she said. "Doug said you could help me with the technical part. Could you just write the section about how the systems work? You know how it all fits together. I'll present it." She smiled. "You're so good at the back-end stuff." She sat in my chair, in my light, every day, and she came down to the freight elevator to ask me to write the words she would use to explain my own work to the very people who already knew it was mine. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. Instead, I said I would have it to her by Thursday, and I wrote her a clean, clear 2-page overview of the integration, and I did not put my name on it, and I handed it over. "I want you to understand why I did that, because it matters to the kind of story this is. I did not write it well to be a martyr. I wrote it well because the buyers were going to read it, and the buyers were the people who actually mattered now, and I was not going to send my own work into that room in worse shape than it deserved just to spite a woman sitting in my chair. The work was mine. I protect what is mine, even when it is being carried by someone who did not build it, especially then." Doug was the other half of the squeeze. Doug could feel the merger coming the way animals feel a storm, and his instinct, always, was to protect himself by managing the narrative, and the narrative he chose was the one that had worked for 7 years. He minimized me, gently, constantly, to anyone who might end up mattering. I overheard him in the break room in early March, talking to one of the buyer's junior people who had started spending time in our building. Aaron Kemper was with me getting coffee, and we both went still. "Audrey is great with the back end," Doug was saying in his easy, generous voice. "Real workhorse. We just want to keep her in her lane through the transition, you know? Let her focus on what she's good at while the rest of us handle the bigger picture, the strategy, the people side. Not everybody's built to lead. Some people are just built to execute, and that's a gift too." He kept saying my lane like it was a kindness he was doing me. He kept saying not everybody's built to lead, with the warm condescension of a man who had never once led anything that he had not first taken from someone quieter. Aaron looked at me. Aaron was about 40, sharp, loyal. One of those rare people who had figured out early that being decent costs you almost nothing and pays you back in ways you cannot predict. He had watched Doug take credit for years, and it ate at him more than it ate at me. "How do you not say anything?" he said quietly when we were back in the corridor. "How do you just stand there and let him?" "Because the person who decides this is not in that break room," I said. "And it is not Doug, and it is not me. I know who holds the key, so I let him build the box. It keeps him busy." Aaron did not know what I meant. He thought I was being philosophical. He found out 3 weeks later that I had been being literal. There was one more turn of the squeeze that I have not told you about, and it was the one that came closest to making me speak before I had decided to. About 10 days before the announcement, the buyers held a working session to review the integration in detail, the single most important meeting in the entire transition, the one where the people who were paying for the system needed to understand exactly how it worked. It was my work they were reviewing. It was, in a real sense, the only meeting in the building that was entirely about me, and I was not invited to it. Doug went, and Sabrina went, carrying the 2-page overview I had written for her with my name nowhere on it. And they sat in a conference room with the buyer's technical people and tried to explain a system that neither of them understood, while I sat at the cubicle by the freight elevator 40 feet away. I heard about how it went from Aaron, who had been allowed in to take notes. He told me that the buyer's people asked 3 or 4 questions that Doug could not answer and Sabrina could not even understand, and that there had been a long, uncomfortable silence, and that one of the buyer's engineers had finally said, with a kind of careful politeness, "Is the person who actually built this available? We'd like to talk to them directly." And Doug had said, smoothly, that the architect was heads down on critical transition work and could not be pulled away, but that he was happy to take any questions back to the team. The architect was me. The critical transition work was sitting by the freight elevator answering email. I had been 40 feet away the whole time, and Doug had told the buyers I was too busy to come, because the one thing more dangerous to Doug than my absence from that room was my presence in it. I sat with that for a long evening. It would have taken one short walk down the corridor to end the whole charade. I did not take the walk. I trusted that Frey already knew what Doug did not, and I let the meeting be exactly as bad as Doug had made it, on the record, in front of the people who counted. There was a moment in early March when I almost did not make it to the end of the wait. Frey called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I took the call in the stairwell because there is no privacy at a freight elevator desk. "The close is on track," he said. "I wanted to check in. Listen, we don't have to make you sit out there until the announcement. We can move you back to a senior office this week. Quietly get you out of that corner. I heard about the relocation. I have to be honest, when I saw your name had been moved to an interior workstation during the diligence period, I assumed it was an error. I can fix it now if you want it fixed." It was the most tempting sentence anyone said to me in those 6 weeks. To be lifted out, 3 weeks early, back into the light, spared the rest of the freight elevator. I stood in the stairwell and I wanted it, the way you want to sit down when your legs are tired. "Leave me where they put me," I said. I would rather the room remember exactly where I was sitting when they find out. There was a pause on the line. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm sure. Move me on the day, not before. I want it to be undeniable." "All right," he said. And then after a moment, with something like respect in his voice, "You know, most people would have told the whole floor by now, just to make the next 6 weeks bearable." "I know," I said. "That's rather the point." I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table and decided exactly how I was going to do it when the day came. I decided that whatever happened, I would handle it by the book. Not loud, not cruel. Every step on the record, every decision defensible, so that no one could ever say I had won by being unfair or vindictive. I had spent 12 years watching other people win by being unfair. I was not going to become them on my first day with power. I would simply move first, and I would move cleanly, and I would let the fairness of it be its own kind of devastation. That is harder than revenge, actually. Revenge is loud and sloppy, and it gives the other person something to point at. Fairness gives them nothing. Fairness just quietly removes them and dares them to complain about the process. I set my alarm for that Monday, and I slept better than I had in 6 weeks. The close completed on a Monday in the middle of March. I knew it would, because Frey had told me the Friday before that the signatures were done, and the announcement to staff would be Monday morning, an all-hands meeting on the main floor, the kind with folding chairs brought up from the basement and a temporary microphone and free pastries that nobody eats. I came in early. I sat at my cubicle by the freight elevator with my coffee and answered email, ordinary as any other morning, while the chairs filled in. About 200 people, the whole regional staff. Doug came in with Sabrina, and they took seats near the front, the good seats, the visible ones. Pat Lund stood off to the side with the other executives, arms folded, wearing a cardigan the color of sand. Aaron sat a few rows back and caught my eye and gave me a small puzzled look because he could not understand why I had not pushed harder in 6 weeks to get out of the corner. Gwen sat near the back, where she always sat watching, the way she had watched everything for 40 years. Malcolm Fry got up to the microphone. He thanked everyone. He said the warm, transitional things that buyers say, that we are so excited and we see tremendous value, and this is the beginning of something things. People half listened. They had heard the rumors. They were waiting for the part that affected them, which is the only part anyone ever waits for at these meetings, which is, who is in charge now, and am I keeping my job? "Before I go on," Frey said, "I want to address the leadership of the combined regional operation, because I know that's the question on everyone's mind, and I don't believe in making people wait for the part that matters." The room settled. Doug straightened in his chair and adjusted his collar, the small, unconscious grooming of a man who expects to be looked at. I saw it from the back. I saw a great many things from the back that morning that I would not have seen from a window office. There is a clarity to the cheap seats. You can see who is performing and who is not. "We spent a long time evaluating this business," Frey said. "And what we found, very clearly, is that the strength of this operation, the reason we wanted it, the engine of the whole thing, is its integration capability. That capability does not run on software you can buy off a shelf. It runs on one person who built it, who understands it, and who has quietly held it together for over a decade." He looked out at the room. "Effective today, the regional head of the combined operation, the person this entire deal was built around, is Audrey Vaughn." I have lived a long time with the memory of the next 3 seconds, and I will tell it to you as exactly as I can. 200 chairs turned at once. There's a sound a crowd makes when it turns its head all together, a soft collective rustle, fabric and breath, and the scrape of folding chairs. They turned toward the front, first toward the corner office, toward the place where a regional head would obviously be sitting, and the corner office was empty because I was not in it. And then, in a wave, like a wind moving across a field, the heads kept turning, past the front, past the good seats, all the way to the back of the room, to the cubicle by the freight elevator where I was standing up. Because I had stood up, slowly, when he said my name. I set my coffee down on the sticky corner of the desk, and I stood, and I let them find me there. Doug turned with everyone else, and his face did a thing I will not forget. A fast cascade, confusion, then understanding, then something close to fear, all in the time it takes to exhale. Sabrina's mouth opened slightly. Pat Lund, off to the side, went very still, the way a person goes still when they realize the floor they are standing on is not where they thought it was. 200 people looked at me standing by the freight elevator, the desk they put me at for optics, and the freight elevator, with no sense of timing at all, chose that exact moment to ding, and the doors rolled open behind me on an empty car. I did not say anything. I want you to understand that, because I think the temptation, in that moment, the temptation of a lifetime, was to say something, to make a speech, to list everything. I had earned a speech. Nobody would have blamed me. I did not make one. I had spent 12 years being quiet, and I was not going to get loud now, on the one morning when quiet was finally being heard. I just started walking toward the front. Doug half rose out of his chair as I passed his row. "Audrey," he said, low and urgent, reaching out as if to catch my sleeve. "Audrey, listen, I had no idea. None of us, I'm so happy for you. We should talk. Let me." "Later, Doug," I said. Just that. Not cold, not warm. The way you tell someone you would get to their request when you got to it. I kept walking. I walked past the freight elevator one last time, as the regional head, and not as the woman they had parked there, and I walked up the center of the room, between the turned chairs, to where Frey stood at the microphone. He shook my hand. He started to gesture toward the corner office, the obvious office, the one they would assume I wanted now, the throne. "Thank you," I said to him quietly off the microphone. "Could we use the integration team's conference room to start? I'd rather begin where the work actually happens." He smiled, the smile of a man who had bet on the right person, and he said, "Of course." I did not take the corner office that day. I did not take the window office either, the one Sabrina had been sitting in. I will tell you what I did with all of that, but first I have to tell you what I did with Doug, because that is the part of the story people most want to know, and it is the part I'm most careful about telling honestly. A merger always brings a redundancy review. It is not optional, and it is not personal. When you combine two operations, you end up with two of some things, and you cannot keep two of everything, and someone has to go through the combined organization role by role and decide what the new structure actually needs. As regional head, that review was mine to run. I want to be clear that I did not invent it to get to Doug. It would have happened no matter who was in my chair. The only thing I controlled was how it was done. Doug's role, the director role over integration, was the role I had built the case for in 2019, the role they had given him instead of me. In the combined company, with me as regional head, that role made no sense. It had never really made sense. It had been a layer of management sitting on top of work it did not understand, taking credit and adding cost. The buyer's organization did not have a parallel for it, because in a well-run operation, you do not put a salesman in charge of a system and call him the engineer's boss. Sabrina's role, the marketing liaison position, made even less sense, because it had been invented 3 weeks before the demotion specifically to justify giving her an office. There was nothing under it. It was an empty title with a good window. The redundancy review eliminated both. It would have eliminated both, no matter how the analysis was done, because both were genuinely redundant. But I was the one who signed it, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And I am not going to pretend I felt nothing when I did. Doug came to see me in the integration conference room, which I had quietly made my working office, about a week after the announcement. He sat down across from me, and he did not bother with the warm voice this time. "You're really going to do this," he said. "After everything I did for you, I brought you along for 7 years. I was the one who told them how good you were. And the first thing you do with the chair is cut me." I let that sit for a moment. Then I told him the truth, which is the only thing I have ever found worth saying in a room like that. "Doug," I said, The role you held is the role I built. I wrote the case for it in 2019, and they gave it to you. And for 7 years, you sat on top of work you could not do and called yourself the driver. The company that bought us does not need 2 people in this function, and it does not need the one who cannot read the system. That is not revenge. That is just true. If our positions were reversed, and they had been reversed for a single month, you would have done this to me without a second thought, and you would not have lost a minute of sleep. I am giving you the full severance package, the maximum the policy allows. I am giving you a strong reference for what you are actually good at, which is sales, which is a real skill and not a small one. I am giving you 60 days and outplacement support. I am doing all of it by the book, more generously than you would have done it for me. I paused. I am simply doing it first. You would have come for my chair within a month of the close. I know that, and you know that. The only difference between us is that I am doing it cleanly and on the record and without enjoying it. He stared at me. Without enjoying it, he repeated, like it was the least believable part. Without enjoying it, I said. And it was true. I had thought I would enjoy it. For 6 weeks by the freight elevator, I had imagined the satisfaction of this exact conversation. And when it finally came, there was no satisfaction in it at all. There was just a tired correctness, the feeling of an account being balanced that should never have been allowed to go so far into the red. He left. He took the package. To his small credit, he did not make a scene on the way out, and he did sales work somewhere else within a few months, and from what I heard, he was better at it than he had ever been at pretending to run my division, and possibly happier, though I did not check. Pat Lund was a different matter, and I did not have to lift a finger. The thing about the relocation form, the one she printed the night before and flagged for my signature, is that it went into a file. Everything in a company that size goes into a file. And when the buyer's integration team ran their post-close audit, the standard one, looking at how the organization had been managed in the months leading up to the deal, they found a curious thing. They found that during the diligence period, the single most critical employee in the entire operation, the person the buyer had specifically identified as the core asset, had been quietly demoted out of her office and moved to an interior workstation by the freight elevator. They found a relocation form, signed and filed, with a comments line left blank, and they found the reason recorded in the human resources notes in Pat Lund's own careful handwriting. The reason was optics. I was in the room when they asked her about it, because as regional head, I was now part of those reviews. The auditor, a polite young man from the buyer's side, asked Pat Lund to walk him through the decision to relocate the employee who had just been named regional head during the very weeks the buyer was finalizing the acquisition around that employee. Pat Lund used the word again. I almost admired the consistency of it. I was only doing what I was told, she said. It was about optics. The leadership wanted the window line to look a certain way for the buyers. I was just executing the decision. She looked at me, just once. The first time she had looked at me directly since the morning of the form. And I think she was hoping I would help her, the way she had once told me to be a team player. I did not help her, and I did not hurt her. I did not have to. The word optics, which had been strong enough to move me to a cubicle, turned out to be a very weak thing to be standing on in an audit when the optics in question had involved sidelining the person the entire deal depended on. It was not my judgment that ended her standing at the company. It was the plain written record of what she had done, read back to her in a quiet room. She was managed out within the quarter by the buyer's own people through their own process, and I never said a word against her. I did not need to. She had filed the evidence herself the night before with a little adhesive flag on it. Sabrina cleared the window office the week after the announcement. I watched her carry her box out the same way she had carried it in, the framed photographs, the little succulent in its brass pot. She did not say, "You're so good about things this time." She did not say anything to me at all. She just left, and the office sat empty, and the morning light came in through the window and landed on nobody for a while. I want to tell you about the cost, because this is not a story where the woman wins and the music swells and everything was worth it. It was not entirely worth it. Some of it cannot be made worth it. One evening in April, after everyone had gone home, I walked the empty floor. I had not yet decided what to do with the offices. I stood for a while in the window office, the one I had wanted for 12 years, the one they had taken and given to Doug's wife. I could have had it now. I could have had any office in the building. I was the regional head. The corner office, the window office, a whole new office built to my specifications, any of it was mine for the asking. I sat down in the dark in the window office, in the chair Sabrina had sat in my old light, and I felt a strange grief that I had not expected, because I realized that I had wanted that window for 12 years. And now that I could have it, I did not want it anymore, and what I was actually mourning was not the office at all. I was mourning the 12 years. The years I had spent making myself smaller, documenting in secret, swallowing the promotions that went to lesser men, telling myself I was lucky to be allowed to maintain the road I had built. Nobody gives you those years back. You can win every argument you were ever in, and you still do not get the time back that you spent waiting to be seen. That is the part the satisfying version of the story leaves out. Being proven right is cold. It does not warm the years you spent being doubted. It just ends the doubt. I had coffee with Gwen that weekend, at a diner near her house, and I told her about the empty window office and the grief I had felt sitting in it, and she nodded like she had been waiting years for me to figure it out. "You didn't change in 6 weeks," she said. "You didn't suddenly become worth running the region the day that man said your name into a microphone. You were always worth it. They just finally had to do the math the rest of us did years ago. The only thing that changed in 6 weeks is that somebody with the authority to count finally counted." She stirred her coffee. "Don't you go confusing their recognition with your worth. Your worth was never in their hands. If it had been, they'd have lost it for you a long time ago." I told her she had said almost the same thing to me in a parking lot in 2019, the day she told me to write everything down. "And was I right?" she said. "You were right," I said. "You've never once been wrong about people. I read my own record more nights than I ever told you. It's the only reason I was standing up when they said my name. You can't knock down somebody who already knows what she weighs." Gwen got a little quiet then, the way she did when she was moved and did not want to show it, and she changed the subject to her grandchildren, and we let it be. There was one conversation in those weeks that I did not expect and have not forgotten. A woman from the accounting floor, someone I barely knew, stopped me by the elevators one afternoon. She was about my age, quiet, the kind of person who gets overlooked the same way I had been overlooked. She did not congratulate me exactly. She said, "I was in that room when they said your name and everybody turned around and you were standing back there by the freight elevator. I have been here 11 years and I have never seen anything like it. And I went home that night and I told my husband about it and I cried and I could not really explain to him why." She looked embarrassed for a second. "I think it was because for 11 years, I have been sure that this place never sees people like us. And that morning it had to. It had no choice. It saw you whether it wanted to or not." Then she got on the elevator, and that was the whole conversation. I thought about it for a long time afterward. I had carried the 6 weeks as something that happened to me, a private humiliation followed by a private vindication. It had not occurred to me that 200 people had also been in that room, and that some of them had spent their own years being told they were steady but not leadership, and that what they saw when the heads turned was not just my morning. It was a crack of light in a story they had stopped believing could change. I had not done anything for them. I had only refused to disappear. But sometimes that is the thing another person needs to see most, that the disappearing is not required, that you are allowed to simply stand up when they say your name. In the end, here's what I did with the offices, because I think it tells you who I had decided to be. I did not take the window office. I did not take the corner office either. I took the integration conference room, the one where the actual work happened, and I had it set up as my office, with a long table where my team could sit with me, and a wall I could write on, and a door that stayed open most of the day. Aaron asked me why, one afternoon. He had assumed I would take the corner office just to make the point, just to sit in the biggest chair after 12 years of the smallest. "You could have taken the corner office," he said. "Honestly, you should have, just so they all have to walk past you in it every day." "I already made the point," I told him. "The point was never that I wanted a bigger office than Doug. The point is that I never needed the window at all. I needed the work, and the work is finally mine to run. I'm going to sit where the work is." I built the merged region around the people who had actually done the work. I promoted Aaron into real leadership, the kind with a title that matched what he already did. I made sure Gwen, who could have retired 3 times over, was paid and recognized like the institution she was, for as long as she wanted to stay, and she stayed another year just to watch. She said, the most satisfying thing she'd seen in 40 years of working. I built the structure on competence, not on loyalty tests, not on who golfed with whom, not on optics. I had spent 12 years inside a company that promoted the visible over the capable, and I had a chance to build something that did the opposite, and I took it. The floor, the 200 people who had turned in their chairs, were strange with me for a while afterward. Some of them had ignored me for years and were suddenly transparently warm, the way people get warm to the person who turns out to hold the keys. I did not punish them for it, and I did not entirely trust it either. I let that warmth land where it could honestly land. Some of them I forgave easily because they had only ever been indifferent. And indifference is not cruelty, it is just the ordinary fog most people walk around in. Some of them I simply stopped thinking about, which is its own kind of freedom. There is a particular lightness that comes the day a person stops being a question you carry around. Doug had been a question I carried for 7 years. Pat Lund had been a question for 6 weeks. One morning I noticed I had not thought about either of them in days, and the not thinking felt better than any speech I could have made. I keep my own record still, the habit Gwen gave me in a parking lot. I do not need it as ballast anymore, but I keep it because I never want to forget what it felt like to know your own worth in a room that had decided otherwise, and because someday I will sit across a table from a quiet, steady person that everyone has decided is not leadership material, and I will recognize her the way no one recognized me until it was almost too late, and I will do the math early. I will count her before the merger forces anyone to. That is the only revenge I am actually interested in the end. Not getting even. Getting it right next time, for someone else. These days, I walk the floor at the end of the day, past the cubicle by the freight elevator, which belongs to someone else now, some new coordinator just starting out, and the freight elevator still dings every 4 minutes, and I do not flinch at the sound of it anymore. For 6 weeks, that sound was the soundtrack of being made small. Now it is just an elevator. That is what healing actually is, I have come to think. Not the sound going away, the sound losing its power over you. If you are still here, I want to say one thing to you directly, because I suspect some of you know exactly what that cubicle felt like, exactly what it is to be moved aside for optics by people whose respect you spent years trying to earn. If they can move you out of your office for optics, then that office was never recognition. It was a seat they were lending you, and a seat that can be taken away for appearances was never really yours and was never really about your worth. Recognition is a different thing entirely. Recognition is what is still standing after the people who underestimated you no longer get a vote. It is the work you did that was true whether or not anyone clapped. It is the record you kept in private on the nights you doubted yourself. It is the quiet, unshakable arithmetic of what you actually weigh, which no demotion and no promotion and no man with a microphone can change, because it was never theirs to set. So if you are sitting by the freight elevator right now, doing the work that holds the whole place up while someone else sits in your light, do the work well anyway. Keep your own record, know what you weigh, and wait, because the math always comes due. It came due for me on a Monday in March, and when it did, I did not have to say a single word. I just stood up, and one day, when yours comes due, you will stand up too, and the whole room will turn, and you will not need a speech, because standing up will say all of it. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.